Hi, I'm Professor Hamilton, and we are going to look at why defining a market is really vital. And this also explains why in a lot of regions, housing has become extremely expensive and rents are rising. Now, you may have looked around your particular city and you might see that there's lots and lots of construction. And you think, well, if construction is going on, they're building more houses, they're building more apartments, the supply goes up, so the price ought to be going down. But just the opposite is occurring. There's a lot of construction, but rents keep going up, housing prices keep going up. So what's going on? Are the laws of supply and demand not functioning, or is something else going on? Well, as it turns out, something else is going on. The first thing we want to look at is why a real estate market is unique. And this is why defining a market is absolutely vital. And when we define a market, we can define a market based on a geography, on a region. We can base it sometimes on a particular niche of the market that consumers might look for. So for example, let's say we look at the market for soda pop globally. Huge market, right? But we could narrow that down to just soda pop in the United States or soda pop in South America. Or we could narrow it down to just Coca-Cola in the United States or Coca-Cola in Kansas City. So you can knock the parameters of your market down, and the more refined you get, the better it is for your analysis. Now let's look up here. One of the mistakes a lot of people do when they look at real estate is they just think of the real estate market like every other market. So I have apples up here, and to be ADA compliant, and particularly for those of you who might be a little bit visually impaired like my sister is, for example, I'm going to do a little more description when I draw a graph or move to a graph, or I point to a different area of my light board here. So I have in this area here apples, and I have an upward sloping supply curve, a downward sloping demand curve. It's the basic stuff in your micro or macroeconomics in any university. This is the third week of the course usually. Apples are selling for $1 and there's 100 of them on the market. If in fact the supply of apples were to increase, say a couple of orchards show up with their produce at farmers market, shifts our supply curve over here to the right, and that ends up knocking our price down, right? And this is what we normally see in most competitive markets. But that is not what happens in the real estate market. One of the fundamental things we have to look at in the real estate market is that the supply curve, the supply function, I should say, is a line, and I'm drawing a supply line here that is straight up and down. And the reason why I'm drawing it straight up and down is because there is a finite amount of land. So I'm going to put quantity down here on the bottom. And for the price of real estate, I'm going to use an R because we're going to look at rents. So getting a grip on the real estate market is tough because there's so many different regions, there's so many different types of properties. There's a duplex versus a 2-bedroom house versus a 4-bedroom house, 4-bedroom house that has a garage, one that doesn't, apartment building, so it goes on and on and on. So we're going to sort of standardize a few things here. So let's just look at the rents in the real estate market for a 2-bedroom apartment, okay? So I have this straight up and down supply curve because there's a set quantity. There's a set amount of land. They ain't making no more land, is the old saying, right? So what is going to determine the price? Where supply and demand come together. So I'm going to have a very flat, or what we would call a very elastic demand curve. What that means is that people that are looking for housing, either to rent an apartment, to buy a house, they're very income sensitive. They're very price sensitive based on their income. So if the price goes up just a little bit on your apartment, if it goes up 30 bucks, 50 bucks, it can make the difference of whether you stay there or move somewhere else. So that's why this is a very flat line. And let's just pick a number here. I'm going to say $1,800 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Now, I have drawn in the center of this light board sort of an archery target. So you see a center circle and then a circle outside of that and another circle outside of that. And for my example on why defining a market is vital, particularly in the real estate market, I'm going to use Lawrence, Kansas, which is where I reside. And in looking at this circle that we have here, we're going to apply these various factors that enter into the real estate market. The network effect, the Diderot effect, the substitution effect, and then we're going to look at a government failure. So what's in the center circle here on my archery target? Well, you see a couple of dollar signs here. Let's put another dollar sign here. This is where we have very high income earners, wealthy properties, okay? So these might be, and I'm going to standardize this a little bit, and let's say that these are lots that sell for $100,000 a piece. So the center area is going to be very high dollar, high income. In Lawrence, Kansas, this would be where KU is, and then close to where downtown is. Lawrence has the unusual property, a lot of college towns do. Columbia, Missouri has the same thing going on. Norman, Oklahoma, where the downtown is very close to where the actual campus is. That's sort of the engine that drives it. But it's very, very desirable to live in this area. And part of what makes it desirable, well, there's ex-athletes that went to KU that are millionaires and they like having a nice spread. So they want to have a really nice house. There's a lot of people that have alumni for the college. There's a lot of people that are business owners for downtown. It's become a area that is very desirable to live in. And that gets us to this thing called the network effect. And the network effect, and I'm going to give you the definition of it, is the value of a product or service increases directly with the number of like users. So what's that mean here in the real estate market? Well, think about those very elite areas that you know about. Beverly Hills in California, Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, or in this case, the center of town in Lawrence, Kansas. People like hanging out with those other well-to-do individuals. It has a networking effect, and it actually generates the demand for more people to want to live in that particular area. Another example of a network effect is Facebook. If there's only 4 or 5 people on Facebook or on TikTok, who wants to go, right? But if there's thousands of people and you have lots of content, you want to go there more frequently. The fact that there's more users there makes that a more and more desirable area. So that is one effect that plays into the demand going up. Now, what that's going to look like over here when I go over to my real estate graph is this demand curve is going to shift to the right. But there's other effects that are also going to play into the demand going to the right. And governments have responded to this. And they say, well, you know what? This is becoming almost unaffordable. So what we need to do is intervene into the market, take some measures, and try and make it more affordable. And the way that governments will typically do this, city governments, they'll do tax abatement, which says, okay, if you build here, your property doesn't have any property taxes for a number of years. Or we'll give you incentives so that if you build, then you can use these bonds to reduce your tax liability for your state taxes, or maybe federal taxes, or something like that. Or maybe reduce regulations, and that's what the city of Lawrence did, which was a tremendously short-sighted government failure, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. All of these are designed to shift our supply curve, and I'm going to walk over here to my real estate graph again, to shift the supply curve to the right. And when I do that, that's going to lower the rent prices because now there's more units available, or at least theoretically that's what's going to happen. So I went from $1,800 a month to $1,600 a month. It wasn't a huge drop, right? Well, that's partly because we have a very elastic demand curve. Think about, I have another example for you. The Super Bowl has a finite number of seats in it. Say the Super Bowl is taking place in a stadium where there's 50,000 seats. Well, how would you put more seats in there? You might squeeze another 500 in the rafters or something like that, but it's not really going to have that much of an effect because it's not that big of a bump in supply. And it's a very inelastic supply like we have over here. Now, when this happens, there is an incentive to construct more in this particular area, although the design is to make housing more affordable all along. But this brings into play these two other effects. So we have the network effect, which is everybody wants to live where the cool kids are, where where the wealthy people are, where the grocery stores are clean, everything is nice like that. So there is this happening. When more construction happens, depending on the type of construction, it can make the network effect move a second time. Another factor that happens that very much is in tandem with this is the Diderot effect. And this is named after Denis Diderot. He's French, and he has a writing, I think it's Regrets of My New Sleeping Robe or dressing gown, my new dressing gown. And the Diderot effect is the idea, I have this new dressing gown, so, well, now that I have this, you know what I really need? I need some new undergarments to go with it. Well, if I'm going to do that, I need some new slippers. You might think about if you've ever got a new shirt or a friend's got a new shirt, if you're a lady, a new blouse, and you think, you know what? I really need a jacket to go with this new blouse. So then you get the new jacket and you go, well, you know what? Now that I have this new blouse and this jacket, I need to complete the outfit. I need some trousers, right? I need some pants. Well, you know, now that I got these new pants, I really need some shoes to go with. So one thing leads to another, and then we have what's called overconsumption. This is extremely pronounced in high-income real estate areas. It used to be called keeping up with the Joneses. I think that's how you spell Joneses. I may be wrong on that. So you paid $500,000 for your house, and you think, well, you know what? I need to have some nice zoysia grass in here. And your neighbor sees that and goes, well, hey, John just put new zoysia grass in. You know what we ought to do? We ought to put some new rose bushes out front. And then the neighbor next to that looks at it and says, well, hey, they're doing this and they're doing that. Well, we need to upgrade this front porch. And seeing one thing leads to another in the neighborhood. And you end up seeing this Diderot effect, which increases the property values. And when that increases the property values, that means property tax assessments go up. And when property tax assessments goes up, well, that means that lot is no longer $100,000. It's $120,000 for the lot. What it does over here, and I'm pointing on my real estate graph, the supply line that I shifted to the right actually backtracks to the left. And the reason why this backtracks to the left is because the supply line is actually a mathematical function. And taxes are one of the things that plays into that. So we actually don't get the drop in rents that we thought. It comes up to be a little bit less of a drop in rent because of the Diderot effect along with the network effect. But what about these other areas? So I'm pointing back at the circle here on my city. So the downtown and the center area that is high dollar, there are areas that are outside of that. And if you're in Lawrence, this downtown KU area would be called like the Oread, University Heights, University Place, West Lawrence. So we look at areas that are just outside of that. And in these areas, the lots might go for $80,000 a lot. And then further out, $60,000 a lot. And the further away you get from the center area, the same is true with Lakeshore Drive in Illinois, the further away you go. If you go into northern Chicago, you get to the Polish part of town, you'll see that the real estate values and the rents start to drop. So that's happening here. But we have another effect called the substitution effect. And that basically says whatever real estate phenomenon occurs in the center is going to bleed over into these other areas. The substitution effect, you've probably experienced it firsthand. You go to the grocery store, you're going to buy some ribeye steaks. You're expecting it to be $12 a pound. You go up to the butcher counter and holy cow, it's $18 a pound. Woohoo, woohoo. I'm going to have to do a substitution. So I'm going to do burgers on the grill after all, or I'm going to do charcoal steaks, something that's less expensive. It's not as good as what I want, but it's close enough. So we substitute that in. So we want to live in the downtown area, but it's too pricey. So we're going to live in the next area down. So in our supply and demand, I'm drawing another supply and demand. That's just showing that the rents here are going to be a little bit less. If they were $1,600 here, they might be $1,400 here. And then this, of course, would then bleed over into the next region also via the substitution effect. And all of these effects, the network effect and the Diderot effect, also are going to take place in all of these real estate areas to some extent. Some neighborhoods are more desirable than others, right? What are the three main things you have to remember in the real estate market? What is most important? Location, 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 right? Well, that very much takes into account what's going on here. Now, let's look at the government failure, the short-sightedness. A lot of governments respond to these unaffordable rents because their constituents are saying, hey, I can't afford to stay in my house anymore. My mortgage payment is going up. I can't afford to buy this house. The landlord's charging me too high in rent. So they decide the natural mechanism in economics is to increase the supply. So they're making the mistake of not defining the market. And they're thinking of the market like the apples. So I'm pointing over here to the supply and demand for apples that might happen in farmers market. So they try to incentivize the supply to increase, which we've gone over with this. Well, one of the more common things that you're hearing about now is called infill. Or mainly it's infill that is reducing regulations. And in some areas, some parts of the country, this actually works quite well. The idea is, let's build more and more inside the city. So we reduce regulations. So let's allow more density. So we're going to let people put apartment buildings in where apartment buildings were never allowed. We're going to allow somebody on their lot to put a duplex behind their house if they have room. We're going to have no parking requirements. This is another big one. So there's no parking, so you can use the land to put more and more dense buildings in. And that this is sort of going to be the silver bullet that's going to provide more supply. The thought being that the supply, and I'm pointing over here at the real estate market, is going to move the line way over to the right, and that'll eventually cause these rents to go down. The problem is they have not defined their market, so they don't realize that it's a vertical supply line, and they've not taken into account the network or the Diderot effects. Let me give you a more mathematical example to hopefully make some sense out of this. So let's assume that a city commission has done what Lawrence, Kansas did and try to inspire infill by reducing regulations. So you and I are developers, and we want to do some construction to make some money. So we have $500,000 to invest. So we decide we could build 4 houses here. My artwork obviously is award-winning. I know our videographer Paul loves it. So at $125,000 a piece is what it's costing us to build these, right? So we're going to spend $500,000 total in costs. Now, in reality, we'd also have to pay the land on this, and you have to pay infrastructure, and there's transaction costs, on and on and on and on and on. So this is very simplistic to sort of get a feel for what's going on. So as a developer, we could do that, and let's say that we can sell each of these for $250,000 each. So it's $125,000 each in costs, but we're going to sell for double that, $250,000. So when we're done, we're going to sell it for $1 million. And thus we have a profit of, or that's our symbol for profit here, of $500,000. All right? $1 million minus $500,000 gets us $500,000 in profit. As a developer, I could build here in the center area, and rather than build 4 houses, what I'm going to do, I'm going to build me a luxury condo that has 4 condominiums, a condominium building. And I'm going to spend my $500,000 to construct this. But these condominiums are much more valuable. So I'm going to be able to sell these at about $500,000 a piece. So I'm going to net $2 million. So 2 million minus, I'm not going to net, I'm going to sell for 2 million. After I subtract my building costs, I'm going to have 1.5 million in profit. So why would I build 4 of these and get 500,000 in profit when I can build this and get 1.5 million? And after I build my luxury condominiums, there's more people that are going to be downtown. They're going to like the look of those luxury condominiums. And once again, the network and Diderot effects are going to kick in, and it's going to bump our demand up again, which is going to jack our rents up again. So by virtue of these infill regulations that were supposed to make rents more affordable have done just exactly the opposite. And the reason why we call this short-sightedness in government failure is that government is responding to certainly a segment, maybe individuals that has lobbied them. Builders certainly would be a beneficiary of this. Landowners who had it would be a beneficiary of this. Voters believe that it's going to be giving them lower rents. So there's a very short-sighted result, a short benefit. And actually, I'll read you the short-sightedness definition. When politicians prioritize policies with immediate benefits that are easy for voters to see while the costs are delayed, leading to long-term problems. The long-term result of this is that these rents are going to continue to go up, because as these values go up, the property assessments are going to go up. As the property assessments are going to go up, it has the effect of mitigating any increase in supply that we would have had. So there you go. That is why, to begin the analysis, defining the market is absolutely vital. And by the way, in the Lawrence, Kansas example, there was a study that was commissioned by the city commission, and it was like 150, 180 page document, paid like $250,000, something like that for it. How much economic analysis was done? None. Which really, if you think about it, rents, that's an economic concept. The cost of building materials, an economic concept. The price of land, an economic concept. The affordability, which basically is the income of the households that are there, and we haven't gone into that. All of those are economic concepts, but there was no economic analysis that was done. Again, a government failure based on the short-sightedness. Well, that is my take on why rents are rising using the example of Lawrence, Kansas. And the takeaway is make sure you define your markets because that is what is absolutely critical. And I will see you in the next video.